Hey everybody, Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of our questions and answers show. Today is Saturday, November the 10th. We've got a boatload of questions that you guys have sent in, so I want to get started so we can tackle as many as we possibly can within the time constraints we have, which honestly we really don't have any time constraints. I can do this as long as I want, but I'd like to get these a little bit shorter than the hour that we had last time. So let's get started. So the first question we've got here is from HiQ165. He basically asks, Pete, how do you sort all your CDs on your shelves? Can you always find the one you are looking for? My problem is I sort them alphabetically by artist, but I often have to move all of them when I need to add a few. How do you do it? Well, obviously you're talking about behind me here. I also have a full closet of CDs over there. So they're all alphabetical by artist. Well, let me clarify that a little bit. Everything behind you, it's mostly CDs I've got here. I do have movies over here, but these are all CDs here. These are all mainly rock, prog, metal, classic rock, kind of all mixed in there. Probably the most listened to stuff that I have. That's all alphabetical, okay, so A to Z. In my closet over here, I actually have a whole jazz and jazz fusion section. That's all alphabetical by artist. I have an extreme metal section, which is all alphabetical by artist. And then I've got like various prog and metal and hard rock stuff that's just, like here I have a lot of my main bands. So like, the Beatles, The Who, The Stones, Dream Theater, Genesis, Yes, King Crimson, Moody Blues, blah, 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 blah. So my favorite bands, like full collections. In the closet, I have a lot of like one-offs, two-offs of various bands. So, and that's all alphabetical or by genre. So, but to answer your question, what happens when I'm at capacity, which you see here, I tend to start putting stuff face out, which is annoying. And then my wife gets pissed off at that. So what I generally have to do is sometimes I leave a little space on each shelf so I can put new stuff in. But with the rate that I acquire things, sometimes it doesn't last too long. So what I have to do is actually take stuff off of this shelf and transfer it to the closet. So until I expand on this house and maybe make a different room. I don't know, but that's kind of how we do it right now. So anyway, next question from Tootin Von Man is, why do Americans like Kiss? Surely you realize they are the Mutant Ninja Turtles. I just don't get it. All packaging and absolutely no content. Well, I can see how some non-U.S. folks would think that, but growing up a Kiss fan, yeah, they were all about the image. Yeah, they were all a lot about marketing, but you know what? They put on great live shows. And actually, come on, most of those 70s albums are chock full of great songs. So I really can't say that it's all packaging and no content. Arguably, they haven't made the best music over the last like 25 plus years, but those 70s albums and even maybe a couple of the early 80s albums, pretty damn good. I don't know. Not everybody loves Kiss. You either love them or hate them, right? There's not a lot of in between there. I love them. It's fun stuff. It's not the most adventurous music on the planet. You're not going to obviously compare them to the music of Yes or King Crimson or anything like that, and nobody expects to. But fun, hard rock music, absolutely. Cool gimmick for what it was. I dig Kiss. So anyway. Next question from Paul Adams. Pete, I enjoy listening to your stuff. I was born in 1958, so we are close to the same age and like many of the same things, particularly progressive rock and jazz fusion. There are three bands that I have been a huge fan of for many years. Two are still going, kind of, and the other one broke up many years ago. I'm speaking of King's X, Crack the Sky, and Bebop Deluxe. What are your opinions of those three bands? Well, let's tackle one at a time. King's X, I've always, for whatever reason, King's X is like one of those bands that I always thought I should have been huge into, and I just could never really get into them big time. Don't get me, I own Dogman, I have Gretchen Goes to Nebraska, I have Out in the Silent Planet. Those are good albums. I like them. I just never, I don't know what it is about King's X. I think it's Doug's vocals. I never could get his vocal style. It just, every time I listen to him sing, it just is something about his vocals. And I know a lot of people are going to say, how can you think that? How can you say that? To each his own, right? I don't dislike King X by any means. Whenever I hear them, I like them. They just never really grab me I always thought they should have. And I've tried, and I like Ty's guitar playing. I don't know. But those three albums are very, very good. So I don't dislike them at all. I just never really got into them huge. And I keep trying every couple of years to say, let me go revisit King's X again. And I listen to them like, yeah, it's okay, but man, it doesn't grab me. I don't know why. Weird, right? Because I like everything for the most part, so it's kind of strange. Crack the Sky, I only have their debut. That's really all I've ever gotten by them. It's all I've ever heard. I kind of dig it. They're kind of a quirky band. Again, another one of those bands that just never really grabbed me. Probably a band I should go back and revisit. They're kind of quirky, you know. They remind me. It's kind of like the Tubes, Utopia, XTC sort of thing. Kind of proggy, kind of 80s, kind of, well, not 80s, but the 70s stuff is kind of, when you really think about it, if you listen to like the first couple albums, and in my experience, only the first I've ever heard, that kind of predates some of that like quirky early 80s new wave stuff a little bit. So anyway, but again, another band probably should know more of and get into, but I just haven't. Bebop Deluxe, I've got Axe Victim, I've got, Sunburst Finish and Modern Music. I like those quite a bit. I probably need to get that live album from 76, 77, 78, whatever year that came out of. I mean, Nelson's a great guitar player, and I like their early stuff. Very different. Kind of hard to categorize Bebop Deluxe, right? I mean, some of those early albums are kind of proggy, kind of hard rock, and then they got kind of modernish sounding, a little bit of electronic stuff going on, and very different band. But really, those are the only albums I've ever had any experience with. Next question from Vinyl Wreck. What about the Canadian band April Wine? Harder, Faster, and Nature of the Beast are considered classics to me. Top-notch guitar work and excellent tunage. I first saw them in concert on the Harder, Faster tour in '79. They opened for the Scorpions, who opened for Sammy Hagar. The ticket price was $5. Anyway, I wondered if you were into any April Wine. Hell yeah! Unsung Canadian band, in my opinion. I have almost all the April Wine albums up until a point. I kind of stopped there for the mid-'80s. But everything basically up to, Power Play from '82. Great. I love, obviously Nature of the Beast is the first album I ever got. First one I heard. That was really their first little bit of success here in the U.S. I know in Canada they were doing well before then. Stand Back is a great album. It's an earlier album. Electric Jewels, these are early albums, are very, very good. Their first album is really good. Harder, Faster obviously is great. Really unsung band from Canada. Easily in the top 4 or 5 Canadian rock bands of all time. Rush, Triumph, April Wine, BTO, I guess who else? There's a bunch of good Canadian bands. I'm probably forgetting a couple. Anyway, next question from Lawrence Terwilliger. What are your thoughts about rock music in the future? Will it be dehumanized by machines, i.e. programmable music, or will the human factor still be, let's say, 10 years from now? Well, we were asking that question 10 years ago. We were asking that question 20 years ago. I think rock music, although it's going to kind of change and morph over time, it's still going to be around. I mean, there's still a lot of bands and artists who are still playing music, creating music the traditional way. I don't think that's ever going to stop. Will popular music, let's change this a little bit. Will popular music, the music that the masses, will that drastically change over the next decade or so? Probably, because that's the style of music that changes the most. I mean, you listen to like what's popular nowadays and what's been popular for the last like couple decades. It's not very original music. It's music that's synthesized and drawing inspiration from or sampling from stuff from the past. It's a very electronic and synthesized, not a lot of emotion or heart goes into it. And you got like these basically, and I've said this before on this show, you've got bands and artists who are here today, gone tomorrow. So what's popular this week may not be popular 6 months from now. I'm talking about from an artist perspective. So is it going to change and dehumanize? It's already dehumanized a lot as it is, but thankfully, I mean, that's the great thing about it. I mean, you look at the prog genre, you look at like the hard rock and metal genres, there's still tons of young bands coming out and creating new original music. May not be groundbreakingly original, but it's new and they're playing their instruments and they're writing their own songs. I honestly don't think that's going to slow down. I think that's going to continue. So I think we'll be in good shape 10 years from now. But again, if you're someone who's not a diehard music fan, like a lot of you who probably watch this channel, and if you're more of like a mainstream person, and most of those people, they're happy with whatever gets pumped out and churned out by the, So I don't know. We'll see what happens. It'll be interesting to see. From From Pussy Galore. Where do you guys get these names from? From Pussy Galore. How about Porcupine Tree? What about him? I love him. I don't know if you had a specific question. I guess you just want to know if I like them. Yes, I like Porcupine Tree. I've been following Porcupine Tree almost since they first came out. Steven Wilson and company. I got to see them live once, and it was incredible. Will they? I get asked this question a lot. Is Porcupine Tree done? Will they ever? Everybody comes. Oh, I heard Steven Wilson's thinking of revisiting Porcupine Tree. And I'm like, I don't know if that's going to happen or not. He seems pretty happy doing his solo thing, and his solo career is arguably as popular as Porcupine Tree ever were. So, would it be cool to see Porcupine Tree again? Sure. Is it going to happen? I don't know. We'll see. From Dave DiFrancesco, what about Foghat and Montrose? What about them? Again, I guess you're asking if I like them. I love both bands. That first Montrose album is a drop-dead, bona fide hard rock classic, one of the best of the 70s, one of the best debuts of all time. Check out my previous shows, and you'll hear me talk about that quite a bit. I like most of those early Montrose albums. I even like the Ronnie Montrose solo stuff. He's much missed. Rest in peace, Ronnie, a great player. That was a great band. But I think that first lineup with Sammy on vocals, man, what a monster, huh? And Foghat, I love Foghat. Everything they did up until probably like the early mid-'80s stuff, then it started to get a little watered down. But man, what a great hard rock and boogie and blues act. And one of the best. And one of those bands that I never got to see live. I know I can still go see them now, but I don't know if it's really worth it because there's hardly anybody original in the band anymore. But again, I love them to death. Great band. From Jeff Hano, Hano. What do you think are some of the most underrated albums of all time? A few of mine would be Led Zeppelin Presence, Deep Purple Come Taste the Band, and Black Sabbath Born Again. Man, I could do a whole show on this, right? I love your picks, by the way. I think Born Again is an extremely underrated album, and I love it to death. Presence, I don't know if Presence is underrated. I guess when you look at the Zeppelin catalog, it kind of is, right? It's the one that gets talked about the least. I dig Presence quite a bit. That's a good choice. I think Come Taste the Band is an awesome choice here because I think that is completely underrated. And I know back in the day, a lot of Purple fans kind of cast aside Come Taste the Band because Blackmore was gone. They kind of couldn't accept it. And I'll be honest with you, I was one of them. But I tell you, all these years later, I have grown to love Come Taste the Band for what it is. An awesome album. And I'll go another one. I'll stick on Purple for a second. I think Fireball is an incredibly underrated album by them. It's sandwiched in between two of their most well-known albums in rock and Machine Head, at least as far as the Mark II era of the band. But I think Fireball is an extremely underrated album. It has some great songs. In fact, I think I'm going to do a Deep Purple Fireball on my Deep Cuts from Classic Album series because I think that there's a couple of noteworthy tunes on there that everybody knows and remembers, but man, that album has some great deep cuts. Anyway, I digress. Uriah Heep's Look at Yourself is another underrated album. Again, everybody talks about The Magician's Birthday and Demons and Wizards, but man, Look at Yourself is fantastic. Probably my favorite album by the band. How about the Rolling Stones? Goat's Head Soup and It's Only Rock and Roll. The last two albums with Mick Taylor on guitar. I know everybody talks about Exile and everybody talks about Sticky Fingers. And those are great. Beggar's Banquet, Let It Bleed, all that stuff. But man, I love those two Stones albums. They're so underrated. They're so good. So I may do a whole show on that question. That's an awesome question. Next from Scott McGregor. Are there any all-female prog rock bands? That's a good question. The only one I know of, and I actually responded to you directly in the comments, is the Japanese band Ars Nova. And I don't even know if they're still together. I know I listened to them quite a bit. I have a couple of their CDs back in like the mid-late 90s, early 2000s. They were basically like a ELP-style band, but just three women, bass, drums, and keyboards. Really, really good band. So check them out, Ars Nova from Japan. From Mod Nomad 1. As a musician and music fan myself, I've always wondered what the limit is on the number of albums one can truly digest, truly experience, and then speak about and critique with integrity. I own somewhere in the neighborhood of 3,000 CDs and LPs. I've been collecting since the mid-'70s, blah, blah, blah. Basically, what Mod Monad's question is, how long does it take to really digest a CD or an album before you can actually speak about it intelligently or review it. Does it get to a point where you just have too much music and you really can't do it and really assess these particular albums? Like, what's the maximum number of albums? Last part of his question is, what do you honestly think is the maximum number of albums you have had enough time with to give a truly realized and in-depth assessment of? Well, I mean, that's a great question. And in the line of work that I do with Sea of Tranquility, it is extremely difficult to say, okay, a new album has come out by, whoever, doesn't matter. Dream Theater, Uriah Heep, whatever, doesn't matter. Because of the volume of new releases that we are forwarded from record labels and PR groups and the bands themselves, I unfortunately, myself and most of my staff, we don't have the capacity or the time to spend 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month on one release, listening to it over and over and over again to be able to write a review on it. We don't have that time. I mean, at any given time, I have like 50 new releases in my queue that I'm working on that I either going to review on the website and or talk about on one of my shows here on YouTube. So would it be great to, only have 10 albums a year to review and I have the whole year to do it? Absolutely, but that's just not the nature of the beast when you have a vehicle like this, like the Sea of Tranquility webzine or this YouTube show, to really do that. Could I go? So I guess the question is, how in-depth of a review do I give something that I've only listened to 3 times, as opposed to maybe pulling out something from here that I've been listening to for the last 40 years? Obviously, I'm going to know those a lot better front to back, but most people who seek out review sites like Sea of Tranquility and the many others that are out there, they want a good, honest assessment of what the music sounds like so they can make their own choice on whether to investigate it on their own. There are plenty of sites out there, and we do it a lot as well, who will review an album and it'll be like, 10 paragraphs long, song by song, track by track, passage by passage review, and those take a lot of work. We do those on occasion. Obviously, there's some sites that do that as well. And there's some people that like to read stuff like that. But there's a lot of readers now who don't have the patience to sit through a novel-length review of an album. So we kind of take it a little bit of all. We do some real brief stuff. Here's kind of the synopsis. Here's what the music's like. Here's what you can expect. Sometimes I do a lot of track-by-track reviews, especially on more noteworthy albums. So it depends. But to answer your question, it's hard. It's something we really struggle with here is, how many times do we have to listen to a new album to give an honest assessment of it? Because I've been doing this for so long. I mean, I've been doing this for 20 years, writing reviews of albums. You get very good at listening through, just a couple of times and grasping things and being able to give an assessment on it. So, but it's not easy. It's not easy. Great question. Next one from Toavim, Toavm. What do you think about those wannabe prog bands? Lots of bands sound like Gabriel's Genesis. They even chose a singer who sings like him. They write their own stuff, but still some sound as their idols. Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of that, right? The copycats that are out there, the retro bands. Honestly, I don't mind that. If they can do it well, the problem is a lot of these classic bands are no longer, right? So yes, while we have their old music to always listen to and enjoy, a lot of people just are pining for either the bands to get back together, or, which obviously is not going to happen, and the next best thing is you get another younger band who kind of sounds like them coming along playing new and good music. So there are a lot of people who just can't stand that, and I totally get it. I totally get it. I don't mind the band that comes out and they sound just like classic Gabriel era Genesis, or they sound like, Yes, or they sound like Rush, although quite frankly, I haven't heard too many bands that sound like Rush. All the credit to Rush there. But, I've heard a couple here and there who sound a lot like Gentle Giant, which is kind of neat. So I don't particularly mind it. I know there's a lot of people that do, and they only want to hear the classic bands. They don't want to hear any of these younger bands trying to replicate. And it all depends on what you like. I don't mind it. I don't mind the hard rock bands, like especially from Sweden, who are doing like the retro 70s hard rock thing, and maybe they sound like Sabbath or Zeppelin or Deep Purple or whoever, Grand Funk Railroad, all that sort of thing. We could talk about Greta Van Fleet all day long, how they do the Zeppelin thing. I don't really mind it. So, next question from Lonnie V. Pete, I enjoy your videos. My question is about the CD shelves behind you. I get so many questions about these CD shelves. Do you have a filing system for them? Alphabetical, by genre? I come and visit, randomly ask you about a certain CD outlet. If I come to visit and randomly ask you to pull a certain CD out, how long would it take you to pull it from your shelf? Probably 2 seconds, because I know where everything is. So yeah, it's all alphabetical. Like I said earlier, it's alphabetical by artist here and in the closet. But in the closet, I do have them sectioned off by extreme metal, some prog, and jazz and jazz fusion, all that sort of thing. But yeah, it's pretty organized. I'm an organized guy. Next question from Melora Loves Darkness. Hello again, Pete. I just wanted to say thank you for the BOC review. You're very welcome. As well as your love for Kansas. Yep, I love Kansas. So long overdue. What do you think about the forgotten Canadian power trio Triumph? So underrated, one of my favorites, otherwise known as the poor man's Rush. I love Triumph. I was a big Triumph fan when I was a teenager, and in fact, if you haven't seen it, I have done a History of Triumph show on this channel, so go seek it out. Go into our History of playlist and look for it. I love those Triumph albums are great. In fact, I would go on to say I never ever heard their final one without Rick Emmett, but I've heard every other one. I own every other one. I would say the last like 2 are a little on the weak side, but they're still good. But everything before that, great band. I love Triumph. Really dig them. This next one from Sulkier Lou 1754 would like to know, are there any Holy Grail CDs out there you are striving to find? Thanks for these great videos. I thought long and hard about this one because I own almost everything that I ever wanted to own, and but I still keep finding stuff that that I'm interested in. That it's amazing how much is out there. But I will say one of the albums that I've long been searching for, and again I say album. I don't own album. I don't have a record player anymore. I'm still a CD guy. I went from albums originally, got rid of most of them, and went to CDs. Never looked back. But there is one album that to this day actually there's 2 of them, have not been released on CD that I've long been looking for. And that's the band Piper. Their Can't Wait and their self-titled album. Piper was the band that Billy Squier was in before he went solo. Really great band. If you go on YouTube, check them out. Great band. But they have never released their albums on CD. So I would say for me, that's kind of holy grail for me. I'm like quietly, patiently waiting for them to release that on CD at some point. So that's the only one I can think of right now. From Niels B, do you like the Beatles? Of course. Who doesn't like the Beatles? I love the Beatles. But I will tell you, okay, that I like the Stones better, that I like the Who better, and I like Paul McCartney and Wings better than the Beatles. But I love all 3 of those bands big time. So this is not to say that I dislike the Beatles or that I'm marginalizing them at all. I really do like the Beatles a lot, but I happen to like those bands a little bit better. But yeah, love the Beatles. Next question from Moon Crazy 1970. What are your top 10 Queen albums? You ready? Here we go. This is number 1 to number 10. Night at the Opera. Queen, the debut. Sheer Heart Attack, Queen 2, A Day at the Races, Jazz, News of the World, The Game, Innuendo, and A Kind of Magic. Boom! There you go. Love Queen, by the way. I'm hoping to go see the damn movie like real soon, like the new Queen film, the biopic. Next question from Gear Lad and Lad. I don't know if you're into this, but Generation Axe tickets just went on sale. Yeah, I heard. I don't know if I'm going to go. For those of you, this is the Yngwie Malmsteen and Steve Vai, and I forget all who else is doing this. It's basically another version of the G3 tours that were pretty popular in the 90s and the early 2000s, which I'd seen a bunch of those. I just don't know. I love all these players, but I just don't know if I have it in me to go sit through 3-4 hours of, nonstop guitar solos and things like that. And I play guitar and I love guitar music, but I don't know if I need to go see that. But thanks for the question. Next one from Daniel Boss. Can you briefly talk about your t-shirt collection? I will honestly say that is the most asked question I have gotten over the last 4 years of doing this YouTube channel is where the fuck do I get my t-shirts from? I get it, and I really try to, I have so many of them. And I really try hard to wear a different one every show if I can. I know I've overlapped a couple times, but I really try to mix it up. Yeah, I have a pretty extensive t-shirt collection. So where do I get them from? And another part of the question is, do you buy them at the venue when you go to a show, or do you get them from local shops or online retailers? Any sellers you would recommend? Yeah, I get them from all over the place. So I buy shirts when I go to see bands live because, obviously you want to try and support the bands that are touring. So I do that. So I go buy shirts, when I go to the venue and stuff like that. I have some online retail folks that I buy from a lot. One that I bought that has some really cool shirts, especially if you like the older stuff, the old bands and the old classic albums. DJ Tees, they're in the UK. That's DJ like disc jockey, Tees, Tees. In the UK, they're very good. They have a lot of great, like I said, all the old classic bands, especially the guitar players and whatnot, and the album covers and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of the cool like album cover things that you see, that's where I've gotten them from. Rockabilia in the U.S. here, they're a great site to use if you're just looking for like a lot of hard rock and metal, and even some of the more mainstream classic rock bands. If you just want with the name of the band or maybe a classic album or what have you, so they're really good too. But you can find anything you want out there. I mean, go on eBay, for crying out loud. Let's just say you're interested in Yes's Close to the Edge. You love the album cover and you want to get a T-shirt. Just go Google it. You can find it anywhere. Redbubble is another really great online shop that I use. They are fantastic with doing like the album cover stuff as well, and they're located here in the U.S. So good question. The next one from, once again, from Laura Loves Darkness. What do you think or like about early black and death metal bands like Bathory, who created black and Viking Odin metal, and Celtic Frost? Can you please review? Well, maybe I'll do a show on that, but just to talk about it briefly, I love Celtic Frost. I love Bathory. I loved Hellhammer. What are the early bands? Slayer and Venom kind of were in that little thing there. Possessed. Voivod, Sacrifice, Dark Angel, and then of course you got Death and Obituary and Morbid Angel and Atheist and Pestilence. All those bands, all those groups were so important to the creation of death metal and black metal, and helped just jumpstart that whole thing. Love all that early stuff, really do. Next one from Brian Harris. You seem to be a big Yes fan. What are your top 5 tracks that the band have recorded since Steve Howe returned to the band in '96? I have my favorites, but interested in yours. Yeah, well, unfortunately, the band really hasn't recorded their best material since Mr. Howe came back into the band, 23 years ago, 22 years ago. But they do have some good stuff, right? So I think I wrote down a little more than 5, but I figure I put most of the ones that I kind of really like. So how about Be the One, That Is, and Mind Drive, and those 3 are from the 2 Keys to Ascension albums. Those new studio tracks. Those are probably the best songs that the band has done, period, since that time. I like the Magnification song. That's a good tune. I like Homeward the Ladder from the Ladder album. That's pretty good. I really can't say I like the Ladder much as an album. Open Your Eyes I really don't like anything from, so I didn't pick anything from that. In the Presence Of, I like quite a bit also. And how about Fly From Here? Not a very good album, but a very, very good kind of like extended multi-suite piece. So those are some of my favorite newer Yes tracks of the last 20 years. Next question from Brian Sherman. If you could spend the day hanging and having a guitar lesson with any guitarist, who would it be? That's a great question. My favorite guitar player of all time is Ritchie Blackmore, but I have heard he's kind of a nut job and a prick. And again, that's just what I've heard. I love him, but I don't think he's probably the guy you want to hang out with. So I didn't pick him. I kind of wanted to pick Tony Iommi because I think he's like a god to me. I didn't pick him. And Michael Schenker, I'd love to hang out with. He seems like a cool dude, but there might be that kind of like language gap. I know he speaks English pretty well, but he seems like a quirky dude. Gary Moore obviously isn't with us anymore. I think for me, the guy who I think would just be so cool to hang with, because he seems like such a down-to-earth and fun guy, and I love his playing, and I'd love to, pick his brain about things, it would be Steve Morse. I've always loved Steve Morse. I think he would just be a fun guy. He just looks like a fun guy to hang out, talk guitars with, and just chill out for the day. So I would hang out with Steve Morse, I think. But Tony Iommi probably number 2. All right, what else we got here? From James Ferrante. That's actually my mother's maiden name, James. Hey, Pete, I don't know if you've heard of the Boston early 80s band John Butcher Axis. I have. Well, their 1983 self-titled debut and second album, Stare at the Sun, finally came out on CD from Escape Music Group. I just got the second album, the remaster, which was a vinyl rip because I hear a pop sound on one of the tracks. It was absolutely terrible with really bad high-end distortion. The debut wasn't apparent, but the second one was almost unlistenable. You could really hear it in the hissing. My question is, have you heard of this record label, and what has been your experience with them? Honestly, I have not heard anything from that record label. And honestly, the John Butcher Axis, the only album I've ever heard from him was one that I had back in the day, which was Along the Axis, which I think was 85 or something like that. So sorry, no, I've never heard any of the Escape Music Group stuff. But I will. I did go onto their website. They've got some interesting releases on there, so I may check them out. Ben Morrison, tell me your favorite Danish bands and what do you think of the scene? I don't know a ton of the Danish scene other than like some bands that I've obviously been familiar with over the years. You know, obviously Merciful Fate and King Diamond, but the Pretty Maids, I dig the Pretty Maids quite a bit. Artillery, great thrash band. Beyond Twilight, were a really good progressive metal band. I don't think they're currently active though. Manticora is a very good band, like kind of like a power metal band. Mercenary, I really loved Mercenary when they first came out. I wasn't nuts about their last album or two, but man, in the mid 2000s to like about 2010 or 11, they put out a couple great albums. Nemec, I don't know if they're still together here. I used to see them all the time, opening up other extreme acts in New York City, and Pyramids, progressive metal acts. So right there, you got some very, very strong bands. So I would say I'd love to know more about the Danish scene. I don't even know what's going on there as far as prog goes, but for metal bands, they've got quite a good one going on. All right, next one from All Media Reviews, blogspot.com. What is your feeling about Kevin Gilbert's music? Do you own many of his band CDs or soloist favorites? Any thoughts about him and what could have been? Yeah, a tragic loss. I think a very, very talented guy who I think if he would have lived, probably would be like on a Steven Wilson type of level, I think. Although, you know, obviously more of he had more of a pop thing going on. I've heard the Toy Matinee album and those couple Giraffe albums. Plus, I remember he did a lot of those. He worked on those Magna Carta tribute albums, those prog tribute albums. Pretty talented guy. I think his music, I always felt it a little too poppy. You know, the funny thing is when he was kind of around releasing all this stuff, I was, you know, big time metal guy, and at the time I wasn't really listening to a lot of you know, pop stuff, and I always thought that he wasn't quite proggy enough. So, but I hear him now and I can really appreciate him. But I think he would have been a guy who I think would have had a great career ahead of him, and it's just a shame that we lost him. So, good question. From Captain Dallas, hi Pete, really enjoy your channel. Here's 2 questions for you. What's your favorite Budgie album, and are you a fan of Anthony Phillips? That's opposite end of the spectrum. Great question, Dallas. Budgie, In for the Kill. Love that Budgie album. I love Budgie to death. I should do a show just on Budgie. As far as Anthony Phillips, I love the the guitar work he did on the Trespass album by Genesis. That's probably that first really great Genesis album. I thought he was incredible on that. I've heard Geese and the Ghost. That's pretty lovely stuff. And I've heard something with Slow Dance. Yeah, that's been my exposure to Anthony Phillips solo. But I think Geese and the Ghost obviously is pretty legendary. Like I said, pretty lovely album, some gorgeous stuff. But a great acoustic guitar player, great composer, very, very underrated dude. Let's see, what else we got here? From AZDH85224, what is your best live concert you have seen for the lowest ticket price? Mine is in 1977 at Fayline Fields, Phoenix, Arizona. Kiss, Ted Nugent, Montrose, and Bob Seger, all for $650. Wow, that's a steal. You know, I probably should have looked at my ticket stubs before I went to answer this question. You know, most of those 80s shows, early and mid 80s shows that I went to were damn cheap. I mean, you know, like under 10, 12 bucks. But I think if I remember the Monsters of Rock show, because I think you're looking for something on a big scale like that, a big scope. Monsters of Rock show, which I think was in 88 or 89. It was like Van Halen, Metallica, Scorpions, Kingdom Come, Dokken, I don't know who, I might be missing one or more. And it was a full day. And that was only like, I don't even think that was $20. And that was, late 80s, or maybe it was $20, but still pretty cheap. So, second part of your question, did you ever see the Tubes live? No, I have not. That is a band I do want to see before they retire. What Do You Want from Live tour in 77 was in my top 5 of all time. I agree that there probably was. I dig the Tubes. I would like to see them live one of these days. From our buddy Jiff882, how much are your Japanese pressings? I found some Japanese CD pressings of a band called Ethos on Amazon. They were a 70s US prog band. I think I know I have one Ethos album. I think I have two, actually, if I'm not mistaken. I love the slasher genre of horror. Cool, so do I. How much are your Japanese pressings? I guess it all depends. I bought an Alphonse Mouzon Japanese CD just recently. I think that was like $19 or $20 US. Most of the Japanese stuff tends to fall into like the $20 to $25 range. Most of the ones that I bought, especially like a lot of the jazz stuff that I get. But it all depends on what the release is. But generally, you're going to pay over $20 for a Jap import. Louis Roberto, what's your favorite? Who's your favorite out of these three players? Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck. Jeff Beck. Love Jeff Beck. Love Jimmy too. And I love Zeppelin. And I love early Clapton. I've kind of grown dissatisfied with the stuff he's been recording and playing for a couple decades now. But there's no denying, the Cream and the Blind Faith and the Derek and the Dominoes and some of those early solo albums. But and I love the Page stuff, obviously with Zeppelin. But man, Jeff Beck has just been so good for so long. He's the man, and he's just so unique. Nobody sounds like Jeff Beck, so I'm going to go with Jeff there. Hi, Pete. What are your favorite bands regarding vocal harmonies? Well, we could do a whole show on this. Just some of the stuff off the top of my head. The Eagles obviously did great vocal harmonies. Almost everybody in that band sang. Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, obviously. ELO, I think, did really good vocal harmonies. Journey. Uriah Heep. Man, they don't get enough mentioned, but they did some, and they still do to this day, fantastic vocal harmonies. On the metal side, Symphony X. I always love the vocal harmonies Symphony X did. How about the band Sweet? Queen? I mean, there's just some right there. But yeah, that's a good question. What do you think of Animals as leaders? Pretty cool. I haven't heard all of their stuff, but man, that's some thinking man's progressive rock / metal, pretty intricate music there. They're a very talented group. What do you think of the Italian band Aria? Yeah, those first 4 albums, man, pretty damn good. That album Crack or Croc, I don't never know how they pronounce that. That's fine stuff. A really good early mid-70s Italian prog / jazz fusion band. Really, really talented band. Good question. From Multiverser. Fun show, Peter. I like your format. Here's a question that I predict you're going to say there's nothing to it, but I'm curious. What do you think of probably the most compelling rock history conspiracy theory? Paul is dead. I'm open-minded, not 100% sold on it, but I do love to look at and listen to the clues sometimes, being a huge Beatle fan growing up in that era. What's your take on it? It's actually funny because I was reading a Paul McCartney biography just recently, and they touched on that. And I like you. I like to revisit this every now and then and just read all the clues and all the conspiracy stuff. I mean, I think it's a lot of horse shit, obviously, but you could get wrapped up in that, right? You could start saying, "Well, you know what? This kind of makes sense. Maybe it's not him." I honestly, I think it's a load of crap, but it's a pretty cool story, and the fact that every couple decades it kind of gets resurfaced again, and people start thinking about it and wondering about it and questioning it. Just goes to show you how well of a kind of theory it was. Whoever put this together or whoever crafted this did a fine job, because we're still talking about it 50 years later, 40 years later, whatever it is. Next question. Paul Wilk. Which version of Roxy music do you like more, the earlier stuff or the Flesh and Blood Avalon sound? I mean, I like the early stuff. I love Siren and Stranded, Country Life, For Your Pleasure, those early albums, but quite honestly, it's all good, right? Roxy Music is just a pretty cool, very different band, but most of their albums are pretty fun. From Tarkus522, great format on the show. Keep them coming. Was wondering if you were familiar with these newer prog bands, KBB from Japan. Absolutely, really good band. RPWL out of Germany. I'm not that big on RPWL. I know a lot of people really like them. They, for me, are they're kind of generic sounding. I don't know. And there's people obviously going to disagree with that. I don't dislike RPWL, but they're, again, another one of those bands that their music just really hasn't grabbed me. Nothing they've done has really, really grabbed me. But they're not unpleasant to listen to by any means. I just haven't really gotten into them, okay? Black Bonzo from Sweden, who are no longer together. Obviously, Black Bonzo were fantastic. Fantastic. In fact, how about Magic Pie? Throw them in there. Another great newer. They've been around for a little while, prog band. But back to Black Bonzo, yeah, they were awesome. I love those first like 3 Black Bonzo albums. They're actually the one or two of the guys from the band are now in a band called Gin Lady, another really fine Swedish band who kind of do more of like a 70s hard rock thing. Really, really good. Also, your thoughts on Triumvirate? They never seem to get much mention these days when people talk about krautrock. Yeah, one of the best of the German progressive rock bands from the 70s, kind of like Germany's answer to ELP. I think the Spartacus album is great, fantastic. Illusions on a Dumble Dimple and was the Mediterranean Tales, their first album. Quite good. Triumvirate's a very, very good band. From our buddy over at our buddy Anthony Ferraro, are you a fan of the Alice Cooper era 1980 to 83 albums? Yeah, I mean, I like all Alice's albums. I think probably those albums, which is Flush the Fashion, Special Forces, Zipper Catches Skin, and Dada, are probably his most controversial albums. They're very different. They're kind of more like Alice, just trying to do something different and maybe go a little new wave, sort of. I personally, out of those 4, I like Flush the Fashion and Special Forces the best. I don't dislike the other 2. Those albums are a little weird, but I dig them. I don't listen to them as often. That's probably the period in Alice's career that I listen to the least, but they are pretty cool albums, so good question. From Sheldonist, what do you think of the British band Sweet? I used to like their pair of famous hits in the U.S. when they came out while I was in grade school, Ballroom Blitz and Fox on the Run. Though in England and Northern Europe, particularly Germany, Holland, Scandinavia, they were huge. Yeah, they were a pretty big band around the world. I love Sweet. I got all their albums. I think Sweet Fanny Adams and Desolation Boulevard, Give Us a Wink, Off the Record, and Level Headed are all really, really, really good albums. I even like their earlier album, the Coco. I forget the full name of it. But great band that morphed from a kind of like a bubblegum pop band into this really, really good hard rock band. Really, really good. I love Sweet. I think they're great. From David McMillan, thank you for doing this. Group suggestion over the Rhine. What do you think of Baby Grand, later the Hooters? I remember the Hooters. They were pretty big there for a little while here in the U.S. I never heard of Baby Grand, but, All You Zombies, Hanging on a Heartbeat, and We Danced, and Day by Day, pretty damn catchy, like 80s pop. I kind of dug them, good band. Next question from Snakebite Sounds, our buddy Andy. Hi, Pete. Really enjoy the show. Excellent Q&A. My question would be to tell us your favorite 5 guitarists and why. Great question. Richie Blackmore, number 1. I'm a huge Deep Purple fan. I found, and I still find, that Blackmore's work in like the first period that he was in Deep Purple was just so full of fire and danger and excitement. You never knew what he was going to do. And he really has a style that was just so different from anything else that was going on. He could play heavy. He could do the blues. He could do these classical things. He could do like all the feedback and the whammy bar stuff. Just an incredibly innovative guitar player that probably at the time, next to Hendrix, was the most kind of out there player that was really doing something different. And I just love Richie. And then for that, and the stuff he did with Rainbow too was just very, very cool. So Richie has been my favorite for a long, long time. Number 2, Gary Moore. I miss him so much. He meant so much to me as a player. And I, tried to copy his licks a lot when I was a youngster trying to play guitar. And whether it was his blues playing or some of the jazzier stuff that he did, or when he was really into the hard rock and almost metal stuff, his playing, I felt it. Those solos, I felt it in my gut. I loved his vocals. I loved his songwriting. Great player. Just miss him so much. Tony Iommi. Love Tony. The master of the riff. Black Sabbath, one of my favorite bands of all time. And my style of playing, I just fart around on the guitar. It's what I've been doing for years. I'm a riff guy. I've learned so much from Tony, and he's meant a ton to me. And again, one of those guys that when he plays, it's him. There's just nobody who sounds like Tony Iommi. Michael Schenker, just one of the best lead players of all time. And his playing just excites the hell out of me. Always has. And he's just, the way he creates solos, they're so lyrical, they're so memorable. There's nobody like him. And number 5, Robin Trower. Been a huge Trower fan. In fact, I was a huge Trower fan before I became a Hendrix fan, actually, which is kind of crazy. And I love Hendrix. Probably would have been number 6 on this list, but Love Trower. Again, another guy that just his soulful playing just sends shivers up and down. I just feel it. He plays a solo, he plays a riff, I feel it. And he's just done some just fantastic things over the year. And you go see him, he's 70-something years old, and you go see him live to this day, and he still makes me feel the same way. That's what it's all about, right? Next question, Richard Strickler. Are you a fan of Quentin Tarantino's films? If so, do you prefer Reservoir Dogs or Pulp Fiction? God, I love both of those movies to death. That's like saying, if you're a peanut butter and jelly fan, do you like the peanut butter or the jelly, right? Can't have one without the other. I'm going to say Pulp Fiction just because, and it's by a nose. And you know what? If you ask me this tomorrow, I'll probably give you a different answer. I love all of Tarantino's films, by the way. Those two are like the best, but he's got a lot of great ones. I love Jackie Brown. They're all good. I really am a Tarantino fan. But I think Pulp Fiction, just because it was just so smart and hip and memorable, the amount of memorable lines and scenes in that movie are just out of control. But I think Reservoir Dogs, for its brutality and for it was a movie in the right place at the right time, and it really helped launch his career. But I got to give it to Pulp Fiction. Again, one of those movies I watch every year religiously and have since it came out. Great movie. Next one from Occupy New Paradigm. Do you like any stuff do you like any other stuff like garage, psych, glam, punk, new wave, grunge, alternative, industrial, indie, or is it really just metal and prog? I mean, metal and prog and jazz fusion are my favorites. Hard rock, classic rock, those are my favorites. I do like a lot of psych. Like, I'm a huge Hawkwind fan, and I like a lot of Hawkwind style bands, Ozric Tentacles and what have you. Glam, depends on what you mean by glam. If you're talking like glam stuff from the 70s, yeah, I totally get like early Bowie and T-Rex and all that kind of stuff. Totally like all that. More recent glam, can't say I know much about it. As far as like the glam metal, glam, hard rock and glam from the 80s, not really. I'm not a big punk fan. I do like some new wave. Grunge I was never really big on, or alternative. Other than, I can listen to Soundgarden, and I love Alice in Chains, but a lot of the other stuff just didn't really sit well with me. Industrial, I'm not much into. Not much into indie. So there's your answer. I've always been a hard rock and metal guy who got into prog a little bit later on and became totally enraptured in that. And I always liked jazz and jazz fusion. But I love blues also. Love jazz. Next question from Melinda Murphy. I would love to know what you think the future of vinyl records is. Will it continue to grow or go bust? Is it smart to buy expensive, rare records? I have decided personally not to go back into the vinyl thing, like you heard on my last show, on this episode, or the first episode of this show. I originally was a vinyl guy. I had a ton of vinyl. I sold them all. Probably shouldn't have. I have like a dozen left. That's about it. I've been buying CDs since like 1990, so obviously I got a lot of CDs. So I have decided not to go back and do the vinyl thing, but I know a lot of people who have done that. A lot of my friends spend a lot of money on vinyl. I mean, some of the new vinyl is like $20, $30 for like new releases, and then you go get like these new pressings of classic stuff, and you could spend a fortune on vinyl nowadays, but people are doing it. I think people like the way it sounds better, and they especially people who remember the days when vinyl was number one, they missed it, and now they're re-experiencing that again. So I think it's going to continue to grow, but we'll see. Again, it's going to continue to grow, I think, more with older folks, because a lot of the younger people really are not interested in owning physical media. For them, accessing music on a streaming service or downloading something is fine. They don't need to have an album or a CD. But I think amongst the 40 and over crowd, I think vinyl is going to continue to be strong going forward. So I don't see it going away anytime soon. From Wizardo Fox, Pete, my question, can you name favorite guitarists who aren't virtuosos but you consider them great, and why? Great question. Mark Farner from Grand Funk Railroad. He was kind of a garagey type player, not a virtuoso, but man, his solos, they were kind of sloppy, but they screamed, dripping with feedback. He had this funkiness to his playing that, again, you felt deep down inside. I love Mark Farner. Keith Richards, I would say Keith obviously is not a virtuoso player like a Hendrix or a Page or a Beck or something like that. But man, what a master rhythm player. And all these different tunings and stuff. So I think, Keith, I always really liked him as a guitar player, but again, not as a virtuoso player. As a great all-around player, really good blues player. He's just was so great with like just playing chords and rhythms and things like that. Same thing with like guys like Springsteen or Tom Petty. Really good rhythm players. I think Springsteen's probably a pretty decent lead player when he wants to. He's not technically that adept, but man, his solos kind of scream, right? He put some feeling behind it. Tom Petty, good 12-string player, good with riffs and things like that. Very lyrical player. Dave Davies with the Kinks, not a virtuoso, but man, he had some power to him, right? James Hetfield from Metallica, one of the best metal rhythm guitar players ever. The riff master. Not a fantastic lead player, but you know what? Man, could he play rhythms. Kerry King from Slayer, another guy who not really a virtuoso. A lot of people say, man, when he plays a solo, it's like noise, and it kind of was. He's gotten better over the years, but man, a guy can come up with some great riffs, huh? So none of these guys are real virtuosos, but just really good players that I always really liked. Another one from our buddy Anthony Ferraro. Have you ever been able to see Brand X since they reformed in 2016? You know what? That's a great question. And they played like 10 minutes from where I live a couple months ago, and I could not make the show. They play at the Town Crier in Beacon, New York, and I could not go. Yeah, I will catch them. I definitely will, but I missed them at that time. Tate Davis. Hello, Pete. Great video. What are your top 3 favorite songs from Uriah Heep's High and Mighty album? Great question. All right. And the best songs on that album is the front end of the album, right? So One Way or Another, where you got John Wetton, who was playing bass with the band at the time, on lead vocals. I think Ken Hensley sings a little bit on that tune as well. That's my favorite song on there. Weep in Silence is a great tune. And Misty Eyes is a great, great song too. Those are the first couple albums, and if you can arguably put in Can't Keep a Good Band Down. That's like my honorable mention. Those are actually that's the first half of the album. I think that's side 1 of the vinyl. Side 2, the second half of the album, not that good. It's okay, but that's not a great Heap album. It's not a terrible Heap album, but that one side is very, very good. Next question from Sanjit Ray. What's your take on the British prog band Van der Graaf Generator? I'm glad you asked. I love Van der Graaf. One of the most unique progressive rock bands of the 70s. Nobody sounds like Van der Graaf. Nobody sounded like him then. Nobody sounds like him now. And some really strong albums, right? The H to He, Pawn Hearts, God Bluff, Still Life. Arguably some of the strongest four album series out of any prog band that you'll find. Classics, each and every one of them. Our buddy Bill Goodwin. Pete, man, you forgot to mention your love for the Mets. I did. I'm a huge New York Met fan. I don't know whether I should admit that or not because seems like they're terrible more than they're good. But yeah, I'm a diehard Met fan. I'm a baseball fan. Also, Pete, you forgot to mention when you were talking about favorite covers last time, how about Derek Riggs drawing the Iron Maiden covers? Absolutely. I totally forgot. Those early Maiden covers are classics. Second to last one from MV Unit 3. 2 huge faves of mine in the prog metal world are Fates Warning and King's X. Why are these bands not bigger or huge in the scene? Well, as I touched upon earlier, yeah, King's X, I really don't understand why they never got big. Again, regardless of whether I really enjoy them or not, I don't dislike them. I never really got into them. I always thought they would have been bigger than they were. Fates Warning, absolutely. I think just neither band really had any songs or albums that really grabbed the general public in more of a mainstream way. But you could look at also like Dream Theater too, other than like Pull Me Under and the Images of Words album. It's not like any of those Dream Theater albums just really, really sold well and had really accessible stuff on them that grabbed the general public. Obviously, all these 3 bands we're talking about here have their hardcore fans. So I don't know. Yeah, both. Fates Warning has done pretty well for themselves, but they've never really broken big. But they're a very respected band, and I think both King's X and Fates Warning, they're very respected by their peers. They have their fans, but unfortunately, they're playing in clubs here in the U.S., right? And maybe they get out do some festival dates and whatnot overseas. But yeah, it's a shame. Neither band really got bigger than they are. So, but yeah, it should have been huge. I agree. Last one, I believe, is from MLG. Hi, Pete. What do you think about a possible review of the classic Motorhead lineup, Lemmy, Fast Eddie, and Filthy? Also the band Sweet. Greetings, Matthias. Yeah, I probably should do a history of Motorhead. Probably be kind of cool. Obviously, that first incarnation of Motorhead is classic. I love the band Sweet too, as I talked about a little bit before. So yeah, it's food for thought for future shows. So thanks for the suggestion. So that's it, guys. A lot of questions. Make sure, remember, this is how we're doing this. So put questions in the comments and feedback of this episode, and I will use those to help support next week's show. I'll take your questions and I'll give you some answers on next week's show. Thanks a lot for all the suggestions and all the questions. Some really good ones on this one today. So make sure you visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. Of course, we're here on the mighty YouTube as often as possible. We got more deep cuts on classic albums coming up this week. Chris Allo and I are trying to fine-tune our schedule so we can do this History of Judas Priest show that we've been talking about for months. We're going to get there. I got a new product showcase coming up this week. Got a bunch of albums, new Haken, new, what else? I don't know. We got all sorts of new stuff over here I'm going to talk about. So that's coming up too. So make sure you tune in. We'll see you next time, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.